I'm Dermot Hussey. Welcome to the YouTube channel for the podcast Riffin Radio. My special guest is Ed Williams. The way he presents jazz is like a tapestry of impressionism, delivery, mood, and music. Ed got his start in broadcasting working as a reporter for the WLIB station, then housed in Harlem's landmark Teresa Hotel. His rise was an afternoon show for WLIB FM called Maiden Voyage, a legendary jazz show. He's also presented progressive rock for WCBS FM New York, and most recently, Blues on Blues for Howard University's WHUR. Here's Ed Williams. Talk about Les McCan. First, as a pianist, and you can single out some of his early albums that might come to mind.
Les McCan while in the Army. You learn a lot in the Army. And you'd be amazed what you could learn in the barracks. And there was a group of us, guys from four cities, Chicago, Detroit, LA, and New York. And each one brought a measure of the cultural fervor of where they were from. Chicago people were R&B and jazz. They were rough. They were straight up. Detroit was all Motown. New York was jazz, straight ahead. You know, New Yorkers get a little snobbish because we had Birdland. All right, okay. LA surprised me. I'd never been to LA at that point. The guys from LA were more laid back, and they talked about the music they were hearing, the West Coast sound. In the 1940s, late 40s, early 50s, the West Coast sound was happening. Dave Brubeck, Chet Baker, Jerry Mully, all of that. But I heard Joe Pass, I heard Gerald Wilson, and I heard about this guy named Les McCan. And I didn't know this. You don't know. I don't know who was Les McCan. So you got to hear Les McCan. So we'd get together on Saturdays in one of the barracks, and we'd listen to music. Dig sides, we called it in those days. And they put on disc by Les McCan. Now, halfway through the 20th century, around 53, 54, in that area, soul music, the gospel tinged soul music. Ray Charles started that. He'd come along and scared some people because he was singing like he was singing church music, they called it. But Ray never sang gospel professionally. But he listened to Five Blind Boys and so on. So that sound caught on. And then in jazz, it was moving from bebop to hard bop to funky music. Jimmy Smith, the organ, Hammond B3. It was happening. It was on Lou Donaldson. That was happening. Les McCan, as I heard him, he was playing gospel chords, beautiful melodies, harmonies, and he was powerful. He didn't play fast. He just played. He was in the sock. He was playing music. And the way in retrospect, after I got to hear him sing, I realized that this was a singer playing the piano. And he was both. He is the singer who plays piano, and he's a piano player who sings. So what happens, he brings the two together. The way he phrases, the way he does everything. We heard that on the Swiss Movement. And whenever he is performing, it is always the singer who plays or the player who sings. But he does them both when he works. And the gospel thing came to, a lot of people were playing at that because, we were very fad conscious in music. And so a lot of people would jump in. Ramsey Lewis had an approach, nothing wrong with that. There were other people who had that approach. It's like the piano. When the Fender Rhodes became popular in rock music, jazz picked it up, but a lot of people just had a Fender Rhodes on the stage. But the acoustic piano really is the instrument. Les McCan was among the earlier ones to play the electric piano. The Fender Rhodes piano, which became really big. Miles got around to it later on. But Les was there first. And whatever he was doing, and Les McCan and Donny Hathaway and Roberta Flack, that was a whole coalition of music that was extraordinary, still is. Then we come to the time where at the Montreux Jazz Festival, 1973, Les McCan and Eddie Harris were on stage. It was a wonderful time. Montreux was always a wonderful time. And they had this tune. They hadn't rehearsed it, had a few changes. They didn't know what they were going to do. They mounted the stage. It was time to go on. And there was excitement, enthusiasm, maybe a little fear, but a desire to go forward. And there was a downbeat. And that ostinato beat shot, bam, 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 and it began to build. The bass, it built and built. It built to the point where it had to explode at some point. And at some point it did. Les threw his head back and began to sing. And they knew they were in the pocket. And Eddie Harris stepped forward, and they accompanied each other. And that's great music happening. That's what happened. That's the essence of jazz, really. You know, because you're improvising, you have a head arrangement, but you don't want much more than that unless you're doing orchestral music or presentation. You have a head arrangement, and then it's up to you and your head and your spirit and your soul to add to that. It is a form of democracy. That's what jazz is. Because the individual player gets to appropriate as much personal freedom as he can use and give it back to the audience. And Les McCan and Eddie Harris and Benny Bailey and the rhythm section, they took off. And the crowd got under them and lifted them up like a hot air balloon. And it happened. And so Joel Dorn, when once the session was everything done, before it was released, Joel Dorn hand delivered a copy to me. At that time, I was doing radio in New York, jazz radio, Maiden Voyage. And he brought it to me. In fact, he brought me a hand-delivered The Acid of Swiss Movement and also Roberta Flack. Now, later on, once the album was out, there's a club in Harlem, 138th Street and 7th Avenue. God, I should know the name of it. I don't remember it. It's an old club. The owner contacted me. He says, I want you to work for me during the week of so-and-so. And it was a week when Eddie Harris and Les McCan were at the club. And I hosted. I'm kind of not sure if Eddie Harris, I know Les McCan was there. And it was, the audience was, the people came because that's a classic album. It really is. The whole album was good, but it was that tune compared to what? Compared to what? Yeah. A wonderful song. Gene McDaniels is a composer of that song. He was a great songwriter. He wrote a couple songs from Roberta, and is a good friend. You know, I knew Gene very well. And so that was it. So at that point, it put Les on another level, and that had a lot to do with the reason I chose him to, because that was so popular to come to Jamaica and perform with us. So that's him as a piano player. And Les has recorded a lot of albums, really a lot of albums. And I know I've heard all of them, pretty much, maybe one or two I didn't hear, but every one, you would think there'd be a lot of sameness in his records. He's the same person, but it's not the same. Subtlety is the key with Les McCan. And man, I could go on with that. But that's pretty much all I have to say about the recordings. Les is a great artist. He's a great personality. He's a great photographer. There's a place, there used to be a hotel called Franconia in New York on 72nd Street. That was his home away from home. And when Les was in town, it was open door to people to come, that he wanted to come and be with him. He'd get out in Jamaica. He got out and walked around with people, man, which is the right thing to do. You have to absorb some of the environment that you're in order to, you have to give something, not just what you bring, but what you pick up while you're there and give it back to people. And whenever, it's like, if you go to a country that speaks a different language, people appreciate the fact that you tried to say a few words if you're not fluent. But when you show a few words, that means you care. And when they find that you care, they give you more. That was my experience. I fell in love with Jamaica. And so did Les, and so did many other people who came down. So he could sing. And they're singing. Some people sing, but they're not really singing. They can hold a note, they can hit the note, hold it, and do a good job. Then you have singers. Les McCan was singing like someone who only sang. Like singing was his primary approach, whereas the piano was. But maybe the singer was more. And you couldn't tell with him. That's another part of his uniqueness. You couldn't tell whether he's a singer who played piano or a piano player who sang. Because all piano players sing. Oscar Peterson sang, but didn't have words, but they hum along what they're doing. But Les was able to do that. Also, Les is a master showman. He knows how to grab an audience and hold that audience, and he can take it anywhere he needs to go with it.
Let's introduce Monty Alexander and Roberta Flack to their first album deals. Can you talk about that? Because it sounds very generous on his part.
Well, he's a generous guy. We know that because when he sits down at the piano in front of an audience, he gives everything he's got. And he engages people and brings them in. I wrote the first liner notes for Monty Alexander. Not his first, I believe it was, but I know it was my first writing was him. I wrote it longhand. And again, because of the connection I had with Atlantic Records, Joel Dorn, the people there, and so on. Roberta, again, there was a taxi ride to Harlem, hand-delivered acetate of her album. First time I ever saw his face. And I'm a part of a story. You know that. I'm from, I was into that in the Voyage in New York. So twice they did that, maybe more. Hand-delivered the acetate before anybody played it. Because I'm right in New York. It's not because I was so special, but I was in New York doing and being heard. So that's how I got it. Then there was Soul to Soul, when the Atlantic took half the roster to Africa for Ali's fight. And the concerts there, the yield of those concerts, man, it was wonderful.
Les McCan's Atlantic album, Swiss Movement with Eddie Harris, is seen as the highlight of his career. What recollections do you have of that album?
Okay. The elements of spontaneity, or at least extemporaneity, because they were doing it for the first time with almost no rehearsal. In that recording, the video of it showed Benny Bailey not quite got there, but he wasn't quite there. Eddie was there, but waiting. Les was there. That's the magic of jazz, of creativity. You don't finish it and then do it. You do it to finish it. And they started with the idea and began to make that develop. And then they got into the opening with the opening of the vamp. You could feel it. It was a bomb getting ready to explode. And then it happened. When at the break, when Les began to sing, and it was on then. And nothing could stop it. Nothing could stop it because it was happening. It was a moment. That's the beauty of improvisation. The ones who know how to improvise, they play to see what's going to happen. All right.
You also produced some special shows with Les McCan in Jamaica. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, that happened because I had been to Jamaica and had been completely captivated by Jamaica. And I had to come up with an idea, a way, a ruse, a scheme, or something to get back to Jamaica and spend some time there. But not just to waste time, but to spend time being productive. I talked a couple of my friends and I to forming a SPW Productions. And they agreed because they wanted to come to Jamaica too. In fact, I called them and said, you got to come down here. Come right now. So they hopped on a plane and came down to Jamaica. And they got the same feeling I had. They caught the same vibe. And we discussed it back in New York and decided we would look into doing something. That was our first event. And the Staple Singers had just done, what was the tune? Was it like a reggae beat? I'll Take You There.
Mm-hmm.
And Les came to mind because I'd done something with Les. I don't remember what it was, but I knew that Les is the kind of guy who, wherever he performs in the world, he's going to be comfortable. And wherever he performs, wherever there's an audience, he's going to capture that audience. He follows the audience, he reads the audience, he knows what to do with it. And when you're dealing with Black people, you got rhythm and motion and a good time. And Les knows how to do that. And he covers from the gospel. He can also, with the terms of music, Black music in America comes out of the field hollers and work songs and spiritual, not gospel, but spiritual. That led to the Jubilee singers and all those, and the spirituals came to gospel. Gospel came later. Today, people conflate the whole thing as gospel music, but it's not true. Spirituals come from the scripture. They're close to scripture, and it's songs. That's what the people sang in the fields, the work fields. It's not church music; it's soul music. People sang in the cotton field, whatever they were doing, they would sing that music because it was sustaining. When the signal songs, when one of the African captives got away, they had a song. One was called "Steal Away Home to Jesus." Jesus was a ship that they came on. Steal away home to Jesus. Another one was when somebody was escaping and the paddle rollers and the dogs were after them. They said, "Wade in the water." They wade in the water, and the dogs couldn't pick up the smell, the scent. So this, being illiterate doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means you can't read and write. They were brilliant people, and when you can't read or write, you have to remember a great deal. The memories are wonderful. That's why our grandparents and forebears remember those stories. That's what happened with Alex Haley and Roots. The people, the aunts and ladies who sat on the porch and talked, and they recall what they've been told. That's what the griot does. And so there's an element in all of us. And so we got to Jamaica, thanks to you in great measure, because you're the seer, the sage who understands these things. And we got the show on, and it was a matter of discovering Jamaica and having that portion of Jamaica to discover us. I told the guys, I said, I'd like for us to establish a presence and just be with the people for a minute and enjoy them and build up to it. They couldn't do it because they're businessmen back in Brooklyn. They couldn't do what I could do because I was not, on radio anymore. So we established that, and then came the moment to bring the group to. I went to Chicago and sat with Pop Staples, and we talked about it. He was slow to the idea. He said, "Jamaica." I said, "Man, you got a tune. It's a reggae beat, and it's a hit. They know about it in Jamaica." And I sold him over dinner. We had it over fried chicken at one of those restaurants in Chicago, and that always gets it, a good meal. And so he agreed to do it, and the ladies liked it, and that's what happened. So it came together, and it was an odyssey. It was a wonderful thing. It was a time when in Jamaica, Michael Manley was prime minister. And it was a time of austerity in Jamaica. You couldn't do certain things. We had, receptions and things, and Michael and Beverly, his wife at the time, would come and join us. And it didn't get us any special favor. I was looking for some, but didn't really get it. But I met the people. I met people up in Redlands and in different St. Thomas. I just made a point to take it up Blue Mountain. And so I wanted to feel that before I walked on the stage to introduce the musicians. And the people who were there loved it. I met a brother who called Django. I was warned against Django. I said, "You don't want to be around him. He's not a good guy." And one night, one afternoon, we were rehearsing, and he was at the door, and they didn't want to. I said, "Who is this guy, Django?" So I went to the door and spoke with him. I said, "Man, come on in, brother." And he came in. I said, "No, you got to sit down." And I said, "Okay." He sat down, and we developed a relationship. He would come by the hotel and bring me coconuts and different things and whatnot. And one night, after one of the shows, I was closing. The guys abandoned me. They went to Jamaica to have fun. So I had to close. So I had the receipts for that evening. And by the time we squared away, everything was dark. And when they opened the door for me to come out with this money, the bag and receipts, he closed the door behind me. And there was one little bulb. And I could see in the distance the grill of the car that I was driving. And I said, "Well, here we go. We're going to see." And I stepped off the steps and headed toward my car. And as I got close to the car, I saw a figure leaning against the car. I didn't know what that meant, but I said, "Well, I'm out here now. Let's go. Let it rip." As I got closer to my car, it was Django. He said, "Brother, I see you here alone. I thought I'd stay behind. Make sure you're all right." Beautiful. Never forgot that. And that's really what music's all about. That's what Les does. He makes an impression on people that you don't forget. He's an open fellow. He gives more than he gets. Les is very influential. He spent the time with the great heiress Doris Duke. He knew her very well. He knows people. And also, Les is a great photographer. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, man. He talks about it in the interview I did with him.
Okay. Les is an artist. And there's a term I don't like to use, and I never use it really about artists and writers who don't know what they're talking about. Love to say underrated. No, not underrated. Undeserved. No, underappreciated. That's what I'm looking for. Underappreciated. And the reason why that is is because many people just don't get to hear certain musicians. If you listen to the radio, they're playing what the record companies want them to play. And it's not all bad, but it rarely involves jazz. Some of the programs, like the Grammys, for example, they talk about American music. Well, where's jazz? Where's gospel? Where's blues? You want to talk about American music? And there would be no American music really without those elements. It's the only original art form in America of music. Well, not the only original art form, but you know what the next one is? Musicals. Because America didn't do a good job at opera, so they did musicals. That's and I think bluegrass is original, not country, but bluegrass. But we know that blues is, we know that gospel is, we know that spirituals are, and we know that jazz certainly is, and it's universal. There was a time when during the Iron Curtain, and you had the Voice of America playing a lot of American music, particularly jazz, behind the Iron Curtain. At that time, none of our ambassadors could go behind the Iron Curtain, but Duke Ellington could and did. Benny Goodman could and did. Ella could and did. And all of the musicians, they could go. They were the real ambassadors. In fact, Dave Brubeck did an album called The Real Ambassadors. Louis Armstrong, Pops could go anywhere. When he went to Africa, they lifted him up. He said it frightened him at first, and they just picked him up aloft and walked through the streets because he was a king in Africa. So our music is, and Les is one of, I've got a whole lot of stuff in my head. Les is one of the real ambassadors of this music, as jazz, as blues, as gospel, and some others. And then he can sing. So that's Les McCan.
Hey man, thank you so much, Ed. Wonderful. Good to see you, man.
A sage, the prophet, who told me a lot of things and helped me a great deal inside. I want to thank you publicly for what I've done it privately. But thank you now. Dermot Hussey, you're a bad brother. Thank you so much.